The first time I saw police lights reflecting off my garage door, I honestly thought someone in my neighborhood was having an emergency. I had no idea those lights were coming for me. And I definitely never imagined that the person who called 911 would be the same person who spent months telling everyone she was protecting our community. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 36 years old when this happened, and at the time I lived in a quiet neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates outside of Austin, Texas. It was one of those places that looked like it came straight out of a real estate magazine. Rows of brick houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, and a giant stone entrance sign that made everyone feel like they had finally made it. People moved there because they wanted peace. They wanted safety. They wanted a place where their kids could ride bikes and neighbors could trust each other. But what I learned the hard way was that sometimes the biggest conflicts do not come from strangers outside the gate. Sometimes they come from the person standing inside the gate with the most power. I worked as a certified firearms safety instructor. My job was not about making people feel tough or intimidating anyone. It was about teaching responsibility, awareness, and respect for the law. Every week, I trained new permit holders, security workers, and even local officers who needed qualification classes. I was the guy who constantly told people that owning a firearm came with a responsibility to stay calm, think clearly, and never let emotions control your decisions. Ironically, those lessons would become the exact reason I survived what happened next. At the center of this entire situation was Melissa Grant, the president of our homeowners association. Melissa was 51 years old, a successful property manager who had built a reputation for being organized, strict, and impossible to challenge. She always carried herself like she was running a company instead of a neighborhood. She had a way of walking into meetings that made people sit straighter before she even spoke. Some residents respected her because she kept things clean and consistent. Others quietly complained that she treated every small disagreement like a battle she needed to win. I never had a personal problem with Melissa before this. Honestly, I barely interacted with her. I paid my HOA fees, followed the rules, and kept to myself. But apparently, my daily routine had become a problem. Every evening after teaching classes, I would park my truck, walk across the community parking area, and head to my front door. I legally carried my concealed handgun with my Texas license to carry. It was never visible, never displayed, and never used to make a statement. It was simply part of my everyday responsibility. For months, nobody said anything. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a certified letter from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I remember standing there in my driveway thinking it was probably some routine notice about landscaping or a neighborhood update. I was wrong. Inside was a formal violation notice with printed security camera images attached. The picture showed me walking toward my home, and according to Melissa, the outline of my concealed holster could be seen under my shirt. The letter claimed I had violated community safety rules and specifically referenced an HOA regulation that supposedly prohibited firearms in common areas. The fine was $5,000. $5,000 because someone believed they could tell me that illegal activity was unacceptable. I read that letter twice because I honestly thought I had misunderstood it. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes a situation is so unbelievable, your brain does not know how else to react. I called the HOA office and eventually got Melissa on the phone. She sounded calm, almost rehearsed. "Ethan, this is not personal," she said. "This community has standards, and everyone has to follow them." I looked down at the letter sitting on my kitchen counter and replied, "Melissa, following standards does not mean following rules that break the law." There was a pause, a long one. Then her tone changed slightly. She told me the HOA had authority over common areas and the residents needed to respect the board's decisions. I explained that state law protected lawful firearm carry and that an HOA could not simply create a rule that overruled state regulations. I expected her to check the information, maybe admit there was a misunderstanding, and move on. Instead, she did something I never expected. She doubled down. 3 days later, another letter arrived. The fine had increased from $5,000 to $10,000, and the letter warned that continued non-compliance could lead to further legal action against my property. That was the moment I realized this was no longer about a rule. It was about control. Melissa was not trying to solve a problem. She was trying to prove that nobody could challenge her authority, and she had no idea that by pushing this fight further, she was about to turn a quiet neighborhood disagreement into something that would bring police, lawyers, the media, and the entire community into the middle of it. I wish I could say I saw everything coming after that. But the truth is, I still believed there was a chance Melissa would eventually realize she had gone too far. I thought maybe after reviewing the law, after talking with the HOA attorney, someone would tell her, hey, this is not the fight you want to have. But instead, she treated my response like a personal challenge. And when someone in a position of power feels embarrassed, sometimes they stop looking for solutions and start looking for ways to win. The next few days were strange. I noticed conversations changing around the neighborhood. People who used to wave while walking their dogs suddenly looked away. A couple of neighbors stopped me near the mailbox and asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like they had already heard a version of the story where I was the problem. One afternoon, my neighbor David, a retired firefighter who lived 2 houses down, walked over while I was cleaning my truck. He looked uncomfortable, like he did not know how to bring up the subject. Finally, he said, "Ethan, I heard there was some issue with the HOA and a firearm." I wiped my hands and told him the truth. I explained that I was licensed, that I had never threatened anyone, and that I had received a massive fine because of illegal activity. David shook his head and said something I would remember later. You know, it's funny. The people who actually understand safety are usually the calmest people around. At the time, I did not realize how important those words would become. Meanwhile, Melissa was preparing her next move. She scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting and sent out a message claiming the board needed to address a growing safety concern. That phrase bothered me because I knew exactly what it was designed to do. It was not about facts. It was about creating fear before anyone heard my side. A few days later, I came home from work after teaching a class on responsible carry practices. It was around 7:30 in the evening. The sun was dropping behind the houses, and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. I pulled into my parking spot, grabbed my bag, and started walking toward my front door. I remember thinking about dinner. I remember thinking about answering a few emails. It was a completely normal moment. Then I saw the flashing lights. 2 police cruisers turned into the street with their emergency lights on. My first thought was that something serious had happened nearby. Then one of the officers called my name. "Sir, stop right there for a moment." I froze, not because I had done anything wrong, but because there is something unsettling about suddenly becoming the center of attention in the place where you are supposed to feel safe. 3 officers approached carefully. Their hands were near their equipment, and one officer calmly explained that they had received a 911 call about an armed suspicious person creating a possible threat. I remember feeling a strange mix of emotions: confusion, frustration, and honestly, disappointment. I had spent years teaching people how important it was to respect law enforcement. And now I was standing in my own neighborhood trying to explain that I was not the danger someone had reported me to be. I kept my hands visible, spoke calmly, and slowly provided my identification, my Texas carry license, and my firearms instructor credentials. The moment changed when one officer looked at my instructor card. His expression shifted. He looked closer and then looked back at me. "Wait a second. Ethan Walker?" he asked. I nodded. Then he smiled slightly. "You trained me last month." His name was Officer Daniel Ruiz. A few weeks earlier, I had taught him and several other officers during a qualification course. Suddenly, the entire situation felt completely different. Officer Ruiz knew exactly who I was. He knew my background. He knew I was the person teaching safety, not someone creating a threat. He asked what happened, and I explained everything from the HOA violation letter to the increased fine and the accusations. He listened carefully, taking notes. After speaking with the other officers, he told me there was no indication I had committed any crime. My carry was lawful. My documentation was valid, and the report did not match the reality in front of them. Before leaving, Officer Ruiz looked at me and said, "Mr. Walker, people have the right to report concerns, but knowingly making false reports about lawful behavior can have serious consequences." I understood exactly what he meant. Someone had used the emergency system to intimidate me. Someone had tried to turn a disagreement into a police matter because they wanted authority on their side, and I knew exactly who that someone was. The next morning, I thought maybe the situation would finally calm down. I was wrong. At 8:15 a.m., my phone started filling with messages. Then more messages came. Then calls. When I opened my email, I saw a message that had been sent to every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates. The subject line was impossible to miss. "Armed resident creates safety concern." Melissa had attached a security camera image of me and included my address. She told neighbors that I refused to cooperate with HOA safety rules and encouraged residents to be cautious. Reading that email was the moment I stopped seeing this as just an HOA disagreement. This was something much bigger. She was not simply trying to find me anymore. She was creating a public image of me as someone dangerous. Within a few hours, the neighborhood was divided. Some residents called asking questions because they were genuinely worried. Others immediately recognized what was happening. 47 homeowners expressed concern, but 23 openly defended me and said they believed the HOA had crossed a line. The funny thing about fear is that it spreads quickly. So does the truth when people start asking questions, and those questions were exactly what Melissa did not want. Because now I was no longer just responding to a fine. I was responding to a public accusation. So I did what I'd always taught my students to do when facing a difficult situation. I stayed calm, I gathered evidence, and I followed the law. I contacted an attorney, and together we prepared something Melissa never expected: a lawsuit. When I signed the lawsuit papers, I remember sitting in my attorney's office for a few minutes after everyone had left the room, just staring at my name printed on the documents in front of me. It was strange because I never imagined my life would reach that point. I was not someone looking for a fight. I was not trying to become the person everyone in the neighborhood was talking about. I was just a guy who went to work, taught people how to be responsible, came home, and tried to live quietly. But sometimes staying quiet does not keep the peace. Sometimes silence only gives someone else more room to control the story. And by that point, I knew I had to do something, not just for myself, but because if someone could take a legal activity, twist the facts, and convince hundreds of people that a responsible person was dangerous, then the problem was much bigger than one HOA violation notice. The lawsuit we filed focused on several things. First, the HOA had attempted to enforce a rule that conflicted with state law. Second, Melissa had damaged my reputation by sending out a message that painted me as a threat without any evidence. And third, she had turned a disagreement into a police matter by involving emergency services when there was no actual danger. My attorney told me something that stuck with me. "Ethan, the strongest case is not built on anger. It is built on facts." So that is exactly what we did. We collected every email, every notice, every photo, every communication from the HOA, and every record from the police response. We did not exaggerate anything. We did not attack Melissa personally. We simply put the truth on the table and let people decide for themselves. But before the case could even move forward, something unexpected happened. The story reached outside Willow Creek Estates. A local reporter contacted me after hearing about the dispute and asked if I was willing to share what happened. At first, I hesitated. I did not want my personal life turned into a public argument. I knew how quickly people online could judge without knowing all the details. But then I thought about the email Melissa sent to my neighbors. She had already made the situation public. She had already told hundreds of people a version of the story where I was the problem. If I stayed silent, only one side would be heard. So I agreed to the interview. The news segment aired 2 days later. The headline immediately caught attention: HOA president reports licensed firearms instructor after dispute over legal carry. The reporter explained the facts, showed the documents, and interviewed several residents from the neighborhood. The response was immediate. Within hours, thousands of people were discussing the story online. Some people focused on the firearm issue. Others focused on HOA authority. But the biggest conversation was something much simpler. Should anyone in a position of power be allowed to publicly label someone dangerous without proof? That question was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Melissa was facing the same public attention she had created for me. The difference was that now people were asking her questions. Questions like why she believed an HOA rule could override state law, why she shared my address with the entire community, why she involved police before attempting a reasonable conversation, and most importantly, why she described a trained professional with a clean record as a threat. The pressure became even stronger when state officials reviewed the situation. The HOA received a formal warning that continued enforcement of the disputed rule could create legal consequences. They were instructed to stop attempting to restrict lawful activity and correct the information that had been distributed to residents. For the first time since this began, I noticed a change. The confidence was gone. The aggressive emails stopped. The threats about fines and property consequences disappeared. But the biggest moment came during the emergency board meeting. I arrived early and sat quietly in the back. I was not there to celebrate. I was not there to embarrass anyone. I simply wanted to hear what the board members had to say. The room was packed. Homeowners who had never attended an HOA meeting before were there because they finally realized this was not just about one person. It was about how decisions were being made for everyone. Melissa stood at the front of the room, but the atmosphere was completely different from the meetings she used to control. People were no longer afraid to speak. One homeowner asked why the board allowed a private disagreement to become a neighborhood warning. Another asked why residents were encouraged to be cautious around someone who had never threatened anyone. Then David, my retired firefighter neighbor, stood up. He looked around the room and said, "Safety is built on facts, not fear." The room became completely silent. Those words summed up everything that had happened. After several hours of discussion, the board held the vote. 5 members voted to remove Melissa Grant as president of the HOA. 1 member voted against it. The decision was final. The person who had spent weeks claiming she was protecting the community was removed because the community no longer trusted her judgment. A few weeks later, the settlement was completed. The original fines were completely erased. The HOA agreed to compensate me for the damage caused by their actions, including legal expenses and the harm done to my reputation. The final settlement amount was $68,000. But honestly, the money was never the part I cared about most. What mattered was that the record was corrected. The truth was finally louder than the accusation. Melissa also sent a written apology to every homeowner. She acknowledged that the HOA had mishandled the situation and that the rules she relied on could not be enforced the way she claimed. Reading that apology was a strange experience because I remembered the first letter I received months earlier, the one that told me I had 30 days to comply or face serious consequences. Now, the same organization was admitting they were wrong, but the most interesting part happened after everything was over. The neighborhood slowly started healing. People who had been divided began talking again. Some neighbors apologized for believing rumors before asking questions. Others admitted they had never considered how easily someone could be judged based on fear instead of facts. And I think that was the real lesson from everything that happened. Communities are not defined by having no disagreements. Disagreements are normal. People have different beliefs, different experiences, and different opinions. The real test is how we handle those disagreements. Do we have conversations? Do we look for facts? Or do we immediately try to silence the person we disagree with? I still believe HOAs can serve a purpose. Rules can be useful. Neighborhood standards can help protect property values and create order. But the moment rules become tools for intimidation, something has gone wrong. A title like president does not make someone automatically correct. A position of authority does not mean unlimited control. And sometimes the person who looks like they are causing trouble is actually the person reminding everyone that fairness still matters. Looking back, I do not think Melissa's biggest mistake was disagreeing with me. Her mistake was believing nobody would challenge her. She assumed the title, the position, and the power of the HOA would be enough to make me surrender. She forgot that facts have a way of catching up. So I want to know what you think. If you were in my position, would you have fought the HOA all the way through, or would you have tried to avoid the attention and walk away? Do you think HOA boards sometimes cross the line when they have too much control over everyday life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is bigger than one neighborhood, one person, or one disagreement. It is about fairness, responsibility, and whether rules should serve people or control them. If this story made you think, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who believes that no one should be above the rules they are supposed to enforce.